Okay, there we go. So thanks to everybody for being here tonight. Thank you to the candidates, two of whom will be elected on November 3rd to represent Peterborough in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. Thank you to voters who are here to learn about the candidates. Special thanks to the League of Women Voters members who are helping to plan and run the event. For 100 years, the League has been a nonpartisan political organization dedicated to the importance of active and informed voting. We're known for running free and fair candidate forums that give all candidates an equal chance to be heard and for voters to ask about the things that matter to them. We invited the public to send us questions via email, and we have passed those on to the moderator, but the candidates have not seen the questions. Tonight, you can use, somebody's coming in, admit. Tonight, you can use the chat to ask questions, but not to make comments. The chat is set up to be private and only the host moderator is going to see the chat. And as far as that goes, we could not be luckier to have Liz Tentarelli back as our moderator tonight. Liz is our League of Women Voters state president, and she's the best. She's moderated forums for Peterborough before. She moderates them all over the place. And she knows how to kind of roll through the questions, and she understands our community too. So this is great. Liz Tentarelli, Carol Kraus, and I are the co-hosts. Here comes one more. And we're muting everybody at the start. Here comes some more. We've got people coming. This is great. So we're putting everybody on mute, but hang on. We'll unmute the candidates when it's their turn to speak. And Marcia, if you could wave your timing paddles. Marcia's our official timekeeper. There are different lengths for different segments. The candidates did get that information, and Liz will go over that again. So how much time there is for different things. Tonight's candidate forum is being recorded, and we will upload it onto YouTube and post a link. So I just want to make sure, yeah, everybody who's just come in is muted. And again, you can chat, but only Liz will be seeing the chat. It's not going to be a public bulletin board or anything like that. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Liz Tentarelli. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And I hope everybody will be patient with us. You know, we're all new to doing candidate forums via Zoom. I would love to meet the candidates and the voters in person, but it's just not possible this year. So as Kate said, this is being recorded. One of the co-sponsors of this event is Rivermead, and it will be broadcast on their closed circuit TV, so all those residents can participate. And we do have to legally tell you that this is being recorded. As Kate said, we've been doing this for 100 years. We're a direct outgrowth of the women's suffrage organization. When women got the right to vote, the suffragists realized they now needed to learn how to use it, how to understand how government works, how to study the issues. And thus was born the League of Women Voters. We try to empower voters, and so these candidate forums are right in that tradition. The candidates have agreed to the following rules: that each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, and we will allow Peter Leishman to make that statement. He is going to be late, and if Mr. David Pilcher gets here, he will also be allowed to make that statement. For questions in general, people will have 90 seconds to answer them, and then we'll try to do about a 90-second closing statement. When we have about 30 seconds left in any one of those segments, Marcia will hold up a yellow card. Would you demonstrate, please, Marcia? So that says you've got 30 seconds to try to complete your idea. And then when you hit the time limit, she will hold up, whoops, she's, there we go, a red card. You finish your sentence, and then we'll move on. And we hope this works out better than it has been working out at the presidential forums, and I'm sure it will. So let's meet the candidates, and we're going to alternate the way in which you answer questions. We'll start alphabetically, and Chris Maidment is going to do his opening statement first. So I need to unmute Chris. Just a moment. Okay. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, thank you, Liz, and thank you, Kate, and to the League of Women Voters for holding this candidate forum. Like you said, I think it's very important that the voters get to know their candidates and what they stand for. So for me personally, my wife, Rachel, and I moved here to Peterborough in 2017, just before our oldest child was born. Finn was born a month after we moved to town. We were really drawn to Peterborough for its wonderful downtown and its great people, and we were proud to call this home. And now, you know, it's time for us to get involved in the community, and we want to be part of the community moving forward. We plan on making Peterborough our home for the foreseeable future, for a long time to come. It's a great town to be raising our children in, and we couldn't be more proud to call Peterborough home. So I'm running for the state rep position because I love New Hampshire, I love Peterborough, and I want to really give back to my community and make it better in ways that I think I can make it better. For example, I think, you know, New Hampshire has a proud tradition of being an income tax and sales tax free state, but that comes at cost, right? We have really high property taxes, and in Peterborough especially, we have higher property taxes comparatively than most of the state. And I think that there's ways that we can work with the state budget and also the local budgets to make sure that we have a fair taxation system that works for all and allows young people to move into Peterborough and call it a home just like we did.
Thank you, Chris. Ivy, I think you should be able to unmute yourself at this point. No?
Yep. I'm asking you to unmute. There you go.
Okay. Ivy Vann.
Ivy Vann. I've lived in Peterborough proper 16 years, and before that, for 14 previous years, Peterborough was a market town. I went to church in Peterborough. I had a library card in Peterborough. I did my grocery shopping in Peterborough. What few dresses I bought in Peterborough. We raised our 4 kids here, my husband Hugh Byer and I. They're, thank God, all grown, and I think supporting, unclear, but they're not calling home for money anyway. I have been in a long career of a variety of things. I drove a school bus. That was my first job in New Hampshire. I was a children's librarian. I was a newspaper reporter and editor at the Milford Cabinet, which is where I met Peter Leishman, who will be here later, I think. Peter was the youngest selectman in Peterborough and Milford in 1980, whatever it was, 2, and I was a pretty young reporter, younger than Peter. And then I taught school for a long time. I went to divinity school, but never got ordained. And over the last 15 years, I've turned myself into an urban planner, and I am now an American Institute of Certified Planners, certified urban planner. There's only about 40 of us in the state of New Hampshire. I have been in the House. This will be, if I'm lucky, my 4th term. I think that the New Hampshire House is an amazing organization. It requires a lot of time in order to be useful there. I have that time to give. I know how it works, and I'm eager to go back and do some of the things that I think we need to do collectively and at the state level rather than at the local level. So I'm Ivy Vann.
Thank you, Ivy. And I want to ask a follow-up question to each of you. Ivy, since you are an incumbent, would you tell us what committee you serve on or have served on? And if that's what you want to continue with. And then Chris, I'll ask what committee you would like to serve on. So just a short answer, Ivy. Please.
Sure. I started out on Fish and Game because that's where they put you when you're new. I thought it was hilariously funny. I loved it. I learned a lot. Then I served on Transportation. And my last term, I served on Public Works and Highways. And I am hoping to move to County and Municipal and County. I always get that backwards because I wanted to move to Municipal and County because there are a number of things that I'm interested in taking on that I think those bills are likely to end up in Municipal and County, and I'd like to be there to bring them through.
Thank you, Ivy. And Chris, what do you imagine yourself requesting?
Well, I could request any number of committees, but like Ivy said, you know, you end up with the committee that they give you as a freshman incomer. You know, in education, the education committee would be very interesting to me. I have 2 young children, so we're looking at a lot of education opportunities, and being able to guide that legislation would be very interesting to me. The other thing is finance. I've always had a thing for numbers and being math, and I always fancied myself an accountant until I went to accountant school, and I wasn't really cut out for that. So the finance committee would be very interesting. I love crunching numbers and looking at that kind of stuff.
Those are 2 very busy committees. I hope you realize that. They often are. So since you mentioned education, let's use that as our next question. Of course, we've got a commission that is studying the funding of public education right now. Their report is due in December. Based on the fact that the state funding for the supposedly adequate education is woefully low. So what are your thoughts about education funding for public schools? And we'll start with Chris and then go to Ivy.
Well, thanks for the question. I mean, this is a really complicated subject, and as everybody here knows, I'm sure, the Conval School District is currently engaged in a lawsuit against the state for the adequate school funding, similar to Claremont 1 and 2, which was fought and won, depending on how you see the issue. I think, you know, the legislature plays a very important role in education funding, and it seems like a lot of times the legislature passes these mandates onto local school districts that then the local school districts have to find funding for, which is actually unconstitutional, which is the stem of the Conval lawsuit, as I understand it. So the legislature needs to take a careful look at what it's mandating these local school districts do or don't do, and then it needs to decide, well, if this is really important, then we're going to have to fund it for local school districts. And if it's not that important, then we need to get rid of the mandate to alleviate these constitutional concerns that we've had over the last couple decades since Claremont 1. To me, you know, education, we can't boil it down to a dollar amount per student, right? Like Conval spends a little bit, depending on which school district you look at, we spend a lot more per pupil than some other school districts, and the results are, you know, comparable or the same, or we're below, depending on how you look at it. So we really need to look at results and not dollar amounts, and we need to find better ways to get the results that we're looking for without coming back to the taxpayers time and time again and saying, look, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to solve the education problem in New Hampshire, in my opinion.
And I think we'll probably circle back to this, but Ivy, your ideas about the school funding situation, changes that you would like to see?
Yeah, I actually think that we need to deal with this on a statewide level. Right now, our problem is that we have property-rich districts which assess themselves quite lightly and raise enough money to very adequately fund their students. We also have property-poor districts which are killing themselves to raise enough money, their schools open, and still can't provide enough education. And it's because by tying so tightly to the local property assessment, there's no way for it to be fair. I think the numbers for Portsmouth they have $1.2 million per child in property assessment versus Berlin, which has something like $350,000 per student for educational property assessment. There's no way that those two places are providing the same education. They just can't. I think that when Claremont was decided, I think it was quite clear that the intention was that there would be a statewide pool, and that statewide pool would be shared out fairly among the districts. And that simply hasn't happened. It just hasn't. And until we can do that, I don't think that there's any other way that we can do it, because their money's simply not there. One of the things that we notice is that I was working in Allenstown on a planning charrette. Allenstown is a great little town. It has walkable urbanism. It has cute little houses. It has a nice main street. Its schools are, quite frankly, terrible. And the reason they're terrible is because they don't have a tax base at all. So a town which is maybe 17 minutes from the State House, therefore would be a good location for someone to live and work in Concord, it's dying because they can't fund their schools.
All right, so let's stay on that topic for a moment. And this inequity among the towns is very obvious. It was the basis of the Claremont lawsuit in the 90s, and it is still continuing. But let's look at some other issues. One great disparity between school districts is transportation funding. And some school districts have to spend a lot more per pupil, but that's not really taken into account in terms of the state support for that. So Chris, do you want to comment on either that transportation funding or something else where you see real differences among towns that the state should step in and help with?
Well, I mean, the state's responsibility in providing an education for every child is to provide the opportunity for that education. Now, transportation-wise, I've been told Conval uses these propane buses. I don't know if that's accurate or not, that cost a lot more for maintenance and fuel than other districts use. I haven't looked into it. Somebody told me that. But if that's the case, right, then, I mean, obviously Conval is a large district that encompasses more towns than most SAUs and most school districts. So our transportation costs are naturally going to be higher. But if we are, as a school district, also making them higher as voters, then is that really the state's responsibility to fund that extra cost that we've voluntarily adopted? Now, I don't think that's the case, right? If we were using the same buses as everybody else and everybody's using the same buses, then maybe the state should be kind of proportionately targeting extra. I'm glad my dogs haven't done that yet.
It's all right. We're all good. Don't worry about it.
So if everybody was using the same buses and the same fuel and everything was proportional, then the state should probably be kicking in an even number. If Conval has to drive, I'm just going to use a random number I've made up, 2 million miles, and Bedford only has to drive 1 million miles per year. Well, then the state should be giving us the share for 2 million miles instead of 1 million miles, because we have to drive that far as regulated by law to pick up these students and bring them to school.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Ivy, do you want to unmute yourself? Is the dog out of there? No, you've got to unmute. Hang on. Ivy, we can't hear you.
No,
There
it's
we go.
because I can't unmute myself. The host has to let me.
Okay, I thought I had done it. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I can't guarantee that they won't go off again.
That's all right.
This was a bus. We're back at the beginning when this was a bus question.
Or something else where you see inherent disparities that the state should address. It could
I think
low-income students, for instance, great numbers of those.
Yeah, I do think that there are disparities between the districts, which the state does not take adequately into account. I do think transportation costs are a huge cost for all districts, and I think it is problematic and difficult, and I will put my urban planner hat on. We brought this on ourselves by creating the back to Allenstown. One of the things that is wonderful about Allenstown is they do not run any buses. Everyone walks to school. So I think that yes, we need to address the disparities between the districts. You know, who has a giant district that has to run more buses for longer routes? Who has more low-income students? Who has more English as a second language students? Who's got more children living precarious existences? How many places are we looking at where, in order to keep body and soul together, parents are working 2 or 3 jobs, which we all know is problematic for the family and for the kids and for everyone else. I do think that it is the responsibility of the state to even out some of those differences in the district. And I think we've done a really terrible job of it. We consistently refuse to fund things. We consistently downshift costs to the local districts, and some districts are more able to absorb it than others. Some costs remain fixed. Part of the problem in New Hampshire, of course, is that our school age population is dropping. And while that ought to mean that our costs, we have fixed costs which will not drop with the number of students in a school. And I think that's another thing that we haven't adequately looked at, is how what kind of money a district gets. Right now it's based on average attendance. I don't know that that's the best way to do it.
Okay, thank you, Ivy. And we did get a comment from one of the voters, a funding formula that takes into consideration the number of students with IEPs, special needs, special programs, and that is in the current formula, perhaps not as vigorously as it should be. And I'm eager to see what the proposal is that comes out in December that may address that. But you people know you're going to be voting on this. So, and you know, so that is there going to be any new source of revenue? So that's my next question, and this can be fairly short. Do you envision any new sources of state revenue being proposed that you would be able to support? And let's see, Ivy, you're going to go first on that one.
Okay. Yeah, I do think we need new sources of revenue. I think we also need to stop giving away the source of revenue we have. I was violently opposed to reducing the business profits tax. I don't think it's effective for businesses in New Hampshire. I don't think it produces enough money for the businesses to make it worth them anything to grow themselves. It's not enough money. And it does take money out of the revenue stream. I think that we need to gas tax again. I have long thought that the way that we collect money for gas tax is wrong. We need to do it by the weight of the vehicle and miles traveled. It's not rocket science. Plenty of places have done this, and we should do it too, because it doesn't make sense to charge the way we're doing it now based on the cost of the vehicle. That doesn't make good sense at all. And as vehicles have become more efficient, the amount of money in the gas tax has gone down. I mean, that was one of the things that we saw over and over in Public Works and Highways, is how much the Public Works and Highways funds have decreased because of the increase in fuel efficiency, coupled at the same time with an increase in travel. So that's a thing I think we need to do, is look at the gas tax. I have long favored legalizing marijuana and taxing it to the limit. I think it's crazy that we don't do that. We are surrounded by other states that have legalized marijuana. Vermont does not tax it, I don't think, because I think they have a grow and give program. But Massachusetts certainly does. And that's a thing that we could do. We have the apparatus for, if we want to do state control, and there are issues with, handing it out to the largest the largest growers, but I do think that that's a source of revenue we're simply ignoring.
Thank you, Ivy. Chris, what about you? Do you see some other ways of raising state revenue or changing sources of revenue?
Well, I never thought I would say this, but I actually agree with Representative Vann on the vehicle tax. You know, charging like she says, charging on the value of the vehicle is not. It doesn't make sense, right? So if you charge on the miles, then it makes a lot more sense. You know, I happen to drive a lot of miles a year, and I personally wouldn't like it, but it is more of a fair, equitable tax compared to the current value standard, right? I'm a contractor by trade, so I drive my truck a lot of miles with a trailer usually on a lot of roads. So I do a lot of wear and tear compared to somebody that drives a Prius that only putts around town here and there. The Prius is worth more than my truck. They shouldn't be paying more road tax than I am. I use the roads more. But in lieu of that, I would want to look at lowering the gas tax to make it a more equitable tax. So if we're going to pay on a mile-based standard instead of gasoline consumption, especially as we transition into these electric vehicles and these hybrid vehicles more and more over the years as we go. The marijuana tax, I am fully in favor of legalizing marijuana. I've been in favor of that for a number of years as well. As far as taxing it to the hilt, as Representative Vann says, I'm not that big of a fan of that. I would kind of want to model the New Hampshire liquor store standard. You know, people flock to New Hampshire to buy our liquor. They go to our state liquor stores. We have a lower liquor tax than other states comparatively. Especially Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine, which are the states that border us. So if we kind of were able to model that and maybe even turn it into a state industry, just like the liquor industry, with also the homestead exemption for local small growers that would be tax exempt, perhaps we could grow our state revenues in that fashion.
So this is interesting. You're both thinking about legalizing marijuana and possibly getting some tax revenue from it, or at least using something like the state liquor store model. Chris, did I understand that part correctly? Okay. All right, let's move on to another question. Thank you both for those answers. Many people consider the climate crisis one of the most critical issues facing our state, our region, our country, our planet. As a state rep, what legislation would you either sponsor, co-sponsor, or support that confronts the climate crisis head on? And Chris, you're going to go first on that one.
That's a tough one.
Yes.
You know, I believe that the climate is changing. I think that's irrefutable, to be honest. But as far as what the government can do about it, I'm a little bit more torn. You know, I don't think that there's any science-based evidence out there that shows that government intervention is going to be able to solve this crisis. You know, so personally, right, I bought 19 acres in Peterborough. I'm a good steward of my land. I don't know that we're net carbon zero because I haven't measured it. We're probably not. Unfortunately, we have oil for heat. I'd love to get on natural gas or propane or a more efficient fuel system. I'd love to get solar. These are all things that we're working on to be more self-sufficient on the one hand and also more economically conscious on the other hand. But you know, we bought our land. We're good stewards of it. We try to do what we can to conserve, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle. As far as what the government can do, I don't know that there's a whole bunch that, you know, local governments or state governments, maybe federal governments can. I don't know that there's a ton that New Hampshire could do that would make a substantial impact on whatever effect that humans are having on the climate.
All right, thank you, Chris. Ivy, what do you see the government might do? Whoops, I've got to unmute you again. Hang on. Okay.
Got it. I do think that there are things that both local government and state government and the federal government can do. Things like, I think that we should invest more heavily in carbon neutral sources of energy for the state and for the federal government. I think that encouraging the state to use the most efficient way to produce things is a thing that we can do. As an urban planner, I will tell you that local land use rules actually have a lot to do with how much gasoline we burn. And that's a thing that could be addressed at the local level. We could encourage more compact development. Over this last 6 months, we've realized in my household that since my husband does not commute anymore, that we could get by with one car. And I think that encourage the kind of development that people want, which is walkable urbanism. And urbanism does not mean downtown Manchester. It just means more than 2 houses together. That is a thing that actually has measurable impact. When people stopped driving at the beginning of the crisis, we saw that had measurable impact on the amount of greenhouse gases being produced. So encouraging less driving is a thing that government can do and can be helpful with. Things like, if you make it easy for people to bicycle, they actually do bicycle. If you make it easy for them to build a house downtown so that they can walk to the grocery store some of the time, they can do that. It makes sense. There's no question in my mind that some things have to be done in an organized way, and that those organized things can make a difference. I'd also like to see New Hampshire invest more in energy efficiency for buildings, for public buildings and for individual houses. The Reggie Fund was used that way, and I think that is a good use of money.
Well, let's stay with that theme just a little bit. There was a bill in the legislature last year that passed that would allow producers of solar energy, home producers of solar energy, to put that into the grid, to put more into the grid. The bill would raise the amount that could go into the grid. That passed with support from both parties. It was vetoed by the governor, called the net metering bill. Chris, I don't know if you were following that one at the time, but would you support, increasing the amount of energy, whether it's from solar or hydro or whatever the homeowner is doing, to go into the grid? Would you increase those numbers if you were voting on it?
So as far as net metering goes, the problem becomes, what's the cost of the energy coming back into the grid? So I'm in favor of unlimited energy coming back into the grid, but we can't be requiring that these energy companies pay the retail rate for the energy coming back into the grid, which is what the net metering bill did, the one that passed the House. There was a different one that did not pass the House. It was ITL, inexpedient to legislate, that would have allowed people to sell energy back to the grid at wholesale rate. Now, so right now the cap is 1 megawatt, I believe. So you can produce up to 1 megawatt. The retailer, the Eversource, has to buy it back at retail rates. So they pay you what you pay for energy. And that increases the cost for everybody that's on the grid that can't afford solar. So I think that solar is a great innovation, especially if we can put it on rooftops everywhere, we can put it on roadways, we can put it on bridges, we can put it wherever. But to sell it back to the grid, it has to be sold at wholesale rates. So you're getting a discount on your energy instead of getting a full rebate, basically. 5 megawatts is a ton of energy. It's a lot. I wouldn't be able to produce that much on my house if I put solar panels everywhere. It's a large field of solar arrays. So what we're looking at is, you get these big fields and these big producers. So you're basically subsidizing solar energy at the expense of ratepayers in the whole state. I'm in favor of expanding net metering, but at the wholesale rate, not the retail rate.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Ivy, how did you vote on the net metering bill?
I voted for the net metering bill because the cheapest energy is the energy that you don't have to build a plant to produce. So I actually don't think it's unfair for Eversource to pay the retail rate for energy they didn't have to make. I think that's perfectly reasonable, and that's why I would be in favor of raising the cap. I think that there's no question that that is the easiest way to get more energy into the system without having to build more plants. And we're not going to build a plant that is going to be a solar plant. We're going to only do that in little pieces. I don't see that we're going to get a giant commercial array in New Hampshire the way that we have seen in some of the Sunbelt states. I think we have to do it. I don't think it's fair to ask homeowners to build the system, as it were, sell their energy back at a loss. That doesn't make any sense to me. We have to encourage more construction of solar, small scale solar, so that we are capturing as much of that as possible. And if we can capture enough of it so that we are reducing the demand on our existing systems and don't have to build any new ones, I think that's a win for us.
Okay, thank you. We're going to change the topic here a bit. And let's talk about the gun control laws in our state, your views of them. There were several bills. One had to deal with automatic weapons or devices to make weapons into semi-automatic weapons. Another issue is background checks. And the third one was a bill that passed the legislature and was vetoed, the so-called red flag law that would allow for temporary confiscation of weapons from somebody who was deemed to be a danger to himself or to others. Your views on those, and I think you're starting with Ivy on that one.
Yes, I voted for the red flag law. I would vote it again, and I'll tell you why. Suicide is a huge problem everywhere. We have a lot of deaths of despair. And one of the things that determines whether a suicide attempt is successful is of a gun, ammunition, and a feeling of hopelessness and despair all in the same place at the same time. And I think that the red flag laws were intended to address that. I think we also see that domestic violence is a huge problem, and that often the presence of a gun turns, what's an ugly situation into a deadly situation. I was in favor of that law. I was also in favor of, I think you're probably were you talking about the large magazine law? Because I signed on to that bill. I don't think that there's any need. I'm perfectly happy with people owning guns. I want them to store them properly. I want them to have trigger locks. I want the ammunition and the gun to be stored separately. I think that people who have a history of violence should not be allowed to own guns. I think that's a reasonable thing. I'd like to see guns treated like automobiles. Could we please insure them the same way? Could we require that level of training before people buy a gun? I'm not opposed to people having a gun. I'm not people hunting. I'm not opposed to people owning a pistol for target shooting. I just think that we're the only country in the world that sees the amount of death through gun violence, that we're it. So really there are things that we could be doing that would make this better.
Thank you, Ivy. And I see that Peter Leishman is in. So Peter, the question we're on right now has to do with some of the gun control laws that we heard in the last session of the legislature, including the red flag law, the ability to make a weapon almost semi-automatic, background checks. So do you want to take them in? I'll go to Chris first, then I'll come to you, Mr. Leishman.
Sure, and Peter's fine.
Okay. All right, Chris?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I was astonished with the number of gun control laws that came before the New Hampshire legislature over the past session. And one of the main reasons I moved to New Hampshire was because they actually respected the right to own a firearm and to bear arms. It's Article 2-A in New Hampshire. It says all persons have the right to keep and bear arms in defense of themselves, the state, and their property. I own several semi-automatic firearms myself. I carry a semi-automatic pistol on my hip every single day. And, you know, the laws that have passed in other states, we can look at Massachusetts or New York or California. New Hampshire is the top 3 safest states in the country. And it has been that way despite our lack of these quote unquote gun control laws, including the red flag law, including high capacity magazine laws. And really what the high capacity magazine laws aim to do is restrict standard capacity magazines. I own one of those, you know, evil AR-15s. I use it for target practice every now and again. I also use it to hunt coyotes when they're trying to eat my chickens. It has a 30-round magazine that I have never expelled more than 10 or 15 from, and I hope to never ever need to expel more than 10 or 15 from it. However, if there ever arose a scenario that I needed more than 10 or 15 rounds, and the government somehow artificially, you know, controlled me from owning a magazine that held that many rounds, I would just have to carry twice as many magazines and spend that much more time reloading. So you know, all of these laws, a lot of them are feel-good laws that say we're gonna solve this gun violence problem by instituting these laws, and really all it does is drive legal gun owners underground.
Thank you, Chris. Peter Leishman has joined us. Thank you. We're glad
Again,
you're
I
here.
apologize for being late. This is my busy time of year with the railroad, so again, I apologize.
All right, well, we're glad you made it. And would you like to address some of those gun control issues? You were in the legislature last term, so you're familiar with them. Your views
Oh,
on
absolutely, and I supported all the measures that someone would call gun control. I feel as a gun owner myself, there's actually no need for high capacity magazines. There are no needs for guns that have been used for mass killings. When the Constitution was drafted, the firearm of choice at the time was a musket, and it took some time to load, and some historians would say it was easier to kill somebody with an axe or some other sort of weapon versus a gun. So relying on, you know, someone's right to keep and bear arms and having the type of weapons we have today, I don't think the founding fathers ever envisioned such weapons at the time the Constitution was written. So there's my response.
I can't imagine they imagined they knew.
No, I'm sure they didn't, because like I said, they were more muskets back then, and it took quite a while to pound that ball down in there. So not like the weapons we have today.
We got a question via email from a young woman who is a representative of an organization called End Sexual Violence on Campus. This is a youth organization focused on mitigating the large issue of sexual violence in her community. And she actually asked 5 questions. I'll let you take any aspects of those, so I'll read them and you can address them as you wish. Do you see it, sexual violence as an issue in our state? What could the legislature do to help address that culture of sexual violence? What would you do to provide institutional support to survivors of sexual assault? And would you support implementing a more comprehensive and effective curriculum in the schools about consent and getting that mandated, and the system of reporting sexual violence, particularly in our high schools and colleges? So there's a lot there. We're going to give you 2 minutes, but we're probably not going to cover all of those, but you can decide how. So I'm going to revise my order here. Let's see, we will start with Chris on that one. I'm sorry, Mr. Maidment. I'm sorry. I try to be formal when I do this, excuse me.
Chris is fine. I think I think there's obviously a problem in this country with sexual assault. And there were a lot of questions there. So could you read me the second one again, real quick, Liz, please?
Sure. What can you do in your role as a state representative, if you're elected, to help address the culture of sexual assault and violence in our community?
Okay, and I think there was another one about education. So I think
Yes.
there's a two-pronged approach as the state legislator. One, we need to shore up the laws against these sexual deviants and sexual assaulters. You know, if you're going to be out assaulting people, then you need to you can't be on the streets. That's not that. There's no place in our society for anybody that commits these types of assault or violence against women or anybody really. So shoring up those laws to make sure that these sexual violators are prosecuted to the fullest extent and that they're kept away from people that they might violate against is very important. Second of all, you know, the education aspect is very important. You know, to teach young men and young women what's acceptable behavior in a common workplace or a common school place, or you know, I mean, even for a woman to be out for a jog at, you know, it's after dark now, it's 7:45 p.m. There's no place for a sexual assault or unwanted encounters in a civilized society, to be honest. So for me, I have a son and a daughter right now, so I'm going to be teaching my son, obviously, what's acceptable behavior with women, what's acceptable behavior with men, what's acceptable behavior in general in public, and I'm going to be teaching my daughter what's acceptable behavior for other people and for her also. So the education is a very big part of that, but also putting away aggressors and keeping them off the streets where they can't aggress against anybody else.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Maidment. Mr. Leishman, your thoughts on this?
Yes, I actually, actually, I think Chris covered it quite well. Obviously, we disagree on the gun issue, but as far as I think there needs to be more education. People need to be made aware of where they can, in fact, go for help. I think the legislature can make a difference in trying to get people out there to let them know that it is wrong and what programs could be offered in schools. I think all of us realize that there's more and more of this that's coming to light, where in the past it was kept in the shadows. I think we've made some progress, but we have a long way to go. So people need to know that they can go places where it's safe. And again, who do they find? Who can they reach out to find the help? I'm trying to think of there were 5 different questions there.
There was one question about our current system of reporting sexual harassment. Would you see changes to that?
Well, I think a lot of folks do not report sexual harassment because they don't feel that there's adequate penalties and they are more fearful of coming forward. I think we need to send the message that you shouldn't be afraid, that you should be able to go to the police department. Often, and my ex-wife was attacked and raped years ago, and she felt like she couldn't bring it forward. She was afraid, and when she did, this happened in Derry, New Hampshire, and when she went to the police department, they almost turned her into a victim by saying, not a victim, but that she perpetrated her somehow with the way she was dressed or whatever, and she felt completely humiliated because they wanted to know why she didn't put up a struggle or whether it was a real gun. So I think some education also needs to be done with law enforcement so people feel comfortable that they're not the ones that brought this assault on. So I think in that sense, and having firsthand experience knowing what my ex-wife went through, that a lot more needs to be done so the victims don't become even more victimized. So.
Thank you, Mr. Leishman. Ms. Vann, what would you add to that? Oops, sorry, how come you keep getting muted again? I'm gonna find you, wait a minute.
There we go.
All right.
I don't know. I think all of those things are true. I think that the underlying problem is that as a society, is not exclusive to the United States, there is a sense that women are not proper people. One of my favorite exercises to do with high school students years ago was to say to a mixed group, so what do you do if you're going to walk down a street after dark? What do you do to keep yourself safe? And the boys look puzzled, and the girls start talking about carrying their keys between their fingers and walking in the middle of the street and being sure that they're out alone. We need the society to stop thinking that it is a women's problem. This is an everybody problem. And I think it does have to come back to education. And I think it does have to do with teaching boys and men that women are not property. And I think that even the most enlightened of us have a tendency to discount women's voices. The League has been around, what, 100 years there, Liz? Not that long. I think there's a sense that when I look at the abuse that the women in the legislature face on a daily basis, it is truly appalling. You cannot believe what kind of messages women who have run for the House, been elected, and are serving to the best of their ability, the kind of hateful, vulgar, sexual, violent remarks. People feel free to make in person, on online media, through mails. This is a bigger problem than the police have to understand that rape victims are pretty much always telling the truth. This is about, are we really citizens?
Thank you, Ivy. Ms. Vann, I'm sorry to hear that in the legislature. I spend a lot of time there going to committee meetings. I have not experienced that, but I'm sorry to hear that the legislators feel that way. Let me ask two quick questions. These are rapid answers on that same topic. And going back to the student's original question, would you support mandating a course in high school curriculums about the idea of consent, informed consent, and teaching all about mutual respect and no means no and so on? That's one question. And the second question is, would you require reporting by schools of reported assault to the police? So two questions, I'll go in that same order. Mr. Maidment?
Yeah, if there's a reported abuse, then absolutely I would vote to mandate reporting that to the police. What was the first question again, Liz? I'm sorry.
Mandate high school curriculums to include something about sexual assault, sexual consent. It's hard to phrase that succinctly, but as part of a health course, perhaps.
I guess it goes back to the education section of this, where we talked about state mandates and unfunded mandates and the cost of education. So I would have to look at that if it's going to, I mean, it's a very important topic, and I think it should be definitely encouraged for high school, middle school, maybe even earlier than that. We know that the sexual abuse much younger than high school or middle-aged women, and it's very unacceptable. So we need to look at, when do we start teaching this, and how much is it going to cost? And the most important thing is getting the education to these young women to let them know that this is not acceptable behavior.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maidment. Mr. Leishman, mandate schools report things to the police and include it in a curriculum?
Very simply, yes and yes. And I'd just like to add, since I have a few seconds here, I guess, with my response, with what Ivy said, it was mandated that legislators take a course as far as proper behavior and what is considered sexual harassment and whatever. And we had, I don't know, Ivy, if you remember, but dozens of legislators that refused to take that training, which is quite telling with even the legislature. there were members that refused to take that training. So there is a problem out there for sure.
Yeah, I remember that in the news, yes. Ms. Vann?
Yes.
Mandated reporting?
Yes and yes. And I hear a lot of talk about women need to do this and women need to understand that. I do not actually think that this is a women's problem. I think this is a social problem, and I think it's a male problem. Yes, women can be assaulters. Please do not think that I don't know that. But in general, the attitude that women are property and able to leered at, looked at, catcalled, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I have 3 daughters, and I remember having to teach my daughters how to keep themselves safe. I taught my son how to behave. I shouldn't have to teach my daughters how to keep themselves safe. We have to talk about this as a much bigger problem. Yes, I am in favor of talking about consent and what that looks like. I don't think that you 4-year-olds kiss their grandpa if they don't want to. I think that people have to understand that bodily autonomy is a real, and we need to teach that, and we need to reinforce it at every level. And yes, I do think that there should be mandatory report of sexual assault and sexual harassment. I mean, I think that the sort of low level, I mean, we joke a lot about, microaggressions, but that kind of constant snapping and sniping about what you've got on and whether your bra straps are showing, and, are you distracting the boys by your clothing? We need to talk about how that's not an okay way to live our lives.
Thank you, Ms. Vann. We're going to change the topic entirely. Obviously, we're doing this via Zoom because of the COVID crisis. We've been doing this kind of thing since March. Give us your take on the state's handling of the COVID crisis, what you wish we had done differently, if anything, and what you think we're doing well. And let's see, we're going to start with Mr. Leishman on that one.
All right, thanks, Liz. I think we could have done a little better. I think we may have opened up things a little soon. Just this week, the company that my railroad hauls material for, a number of the employees have now tested positive for COVID. And I know a lot of businesses, even mine, have been hurt by the earlier shutdowns, but opening things up as quickly as we did, and especially with the uptick, I saw just on the news last night that out of the top states, New Hampshire is now one of the top 4 states where the volume of number of cases and hospitalizations have increased. Although the governor, he has been out there and made a number of suggestions and recommendations. There hasn't been a mandate for wearing masks that we've seen in other states, which I think would be beneficial. Also, the governor has taken all this federal funding that has been received from Washington and divvied it out without legislative oversight. I serve on the Legislative Fiscal Committee, which consists of 5 representatives and 5 senators. There's been $1.2 billion basically given out with no oversight whatsoever of any legislators. It's all been the governor's folks that have made those distributions. So I think transparency could have been a lot better. And again, I think we should have mandated masks early in the stage, and we haven't mandated anything at this point as far as mask wearing, and there only have been suggestions about social distancing. So yes, I think we should have done a lot more, and we could have done it better. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Leishman. Ms. Vann, what do you think we might have done differently, or what did we do right?
I agree with Peter. I think that we were slow to talk seriously. I think we should have had a mask mandate. And I think that we could have tailored a mask mandate that would have made sense. Plenty of places have. I mean, I think the science is quite clear. I understand that there was confusion early on about masks, but by April, late March, early April, we knew that masks were helpful. And we should have done something about that. I think our current are very upsetting. My son, who is a boat builder, told me that I could not come to the boat launch of his latest boat on Friday because my county is red. And he's right. I mean, I don't think I'm sick, but we are not doing well. And I think we need to do better. I think that Chris Sununu's handing out of all of that government money without adequate supervision is problematic, to say the least. And also, I think that this latest decision, which the federal government took about what this could apply their money for, is a wrong decision. And I think it's one that Chris Sununu could have addressed and didn't.
Thank you. Mr. Maidment, what do you think we did right and wrong with the correct response that we had in New Hampshire?
Well, I think New Hampshire performed exceptionally well. If you look at any other state, we have very low hospitalizations right now. I believe it's under 30. We have a total death number of under 500. And of course, every death is tragic. And I pray for all of those families that lost somebody to the coronavirus, COVID-19. But Chris Sununu led us through this tragedy, this virus that was thrust upon us, and he did it exceptionally well. We don't have a statewide mask mandate, but we're still exceptionally low on transmission rate. We're still exceptionally low on cases. We're still exceptionally low on hospitalizations and deaths. He has done a fantastic job. And I'm glad that Representative Leishman brought up the Joint Fiscal Committee that he sits on, because New Hampshire is the actual only state in the country, 1 out of 50, that turned down federal grants for charter schools. And Peter Leishman voted against it more than once. We were granted the highest amount in the nation, $46 million. And he sits on the fiscal committee that oversaw that grant coming in, and he said no. He said no more than once. He said no more than twice. He said no more than 3 times. He said no, actually, a number of 4 times, maybe more. I stopped keeping track after 4. $46 million that would have gone to help disadvantaged students in charter schools. And Peter Leishman said no to that money because Donna Susi and Speaker Shurtleff said, no, we can't take that money. We're the only state in the country.
Mr. Leishman,
I'd like to know what that has to do with COVID.
Well, it doesn't, but it is, as long as Mr. Leishman's name was invoked here, would you like to explain why you voted as you did about that $46 million proposed grant?
Oh, absolutely. I'd be happy to, and I would vote again if the request came in as we saw it from the Commissioner of Education. We have over 20 existing charter schools in the state, which are completely underfunded. They're already out there. I did a lot of research, read all the audits that were presented to the fiscal committee. We have charter schools that have tax liens with the IRS. We have charter schools that have safety issues at their facilities. And I said specifically to the commissioner, what you ought to be doing is getting a federal grant to shore up the existing public charter schools and not creating more charter schools, which would require more state aid, which we do not have for our existing traditional public schools. So Chris is wrong as far as the Senate President or the Speaker of the House telling the fiscal committee how to vote. There's nobody on that committee that didn't look at this thoroughly, both Republicans and Democrats. And like I said, I thoroughly reviewed the documentation that Commissioner Edelblue presented to the fiscal committee, and it didn't pass muster, in my opinion, or others on the fiscal committee. But we're completely removed. The speaker does not tell me how to vote. I think Ivy Vann can testify that I do what I'm not told to do. So my vote would remain the same. And I suggested again to the Commissioner of Education, come back in with a grant that shores up our existing charter school system, not look for more charter schools that would need more state funding. Thanks.
And just so that everybody on this call understands, charter schools are public schools.
And they receive more than double the amount of traditional public schools as far as state funding right now.
because they do not get local tax
That's
money for
correct.
support.
That's correct. Yeah.
Ms. Vann, did you want to chime in on the charter school issue? Oh, sorry. There you are. You've gotten muted again.
Only to say that I also voted against, I would have voted against that money. I have voted against money for charter schools for the same reason, is because I don't think that they're performing as well as we all hoped that they would. And speaking as a person who got a master's in education, deeply about education and schools, I have not seen charter schools deliver the promise that we all hoped for 15 years ago. And I can't see continuing an experiment that does not seem to be working.
All right, thank you. I'm going to change the topic now. The minimum wage. We've had several bills go through the legislature. The minimum wage currently in New Hampshire is at the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. We know nobody can live very comfortably on that. The businesses say, well, we don't pay that. We have to pay more to get workers. So the simple question is, would you support a bill to raise the New Hampshire minimum wage above that current level? And if so, why, and what level would you aim for? So let's start with Ms. Vann on that one.
Yeah, I have in fact voted to raise the minimum wage, and I would do it again. A living wage in Southwest New Hampshire is now around $22 an hour. That's the amount of money that it would take for 1/3 of the income for a one-parent, it's a 3-person household, to be able to afford rent. So there's no question in my mind that we need to raise the minimum wage. And what happens when the minimum wage was instituted, it was intended to be a living wage for a 3-person household, 2 adults and a child. It is not that wage anymore. It hasn't been that wage in a long time. One of the problems that we have constantly in New Hampshire is that we have inadequate housing. And part of the reason that we have inadequate housing is because people actually can't afford to rent a thing because they're not getting paid enough money. There's not a single county in the United States where a 3-person household can afford a 2-bedroom apartment on the minimum wage, not one. And that's not just the federal minimum wage, that's the minimum wage across the United States. And it's just wrong. And I understand that there is the argument that, gosh, we raise the minimum wage and then companies can't afford to hire people. I guess my sense is that if your business model is that you pay your people little enough so that they are eligible for food stamps and rent support, then we need to think about this, because those people get help from us now. We are supporting people who are not being paid enough money. And I think that that's not the sensible way to do it.
Thank you, Ms. Vann. Mr. Maidment, what would be your position on raising the minimum wage?
I couldn't disagree more with Representative Vann. I would challenge somebody in New Hampshire to go actually find a job that's offering the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. I don't think it's possible. I have driven through McDonald's all over this state with signs on their drive-through window saying now hiring starting at minimum $11 an hour. I don't understand why the government needs to artificially raise this wage. Now, she brought up housing and the cost of housing and all of this stuff, which great points, by the way. In New Hampshire, you can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment on $7.25 an hour. You just can't. But you also can't find a job that pays you $7.25 an hour. I would challenge you to go out and find a job that pays you less than $11 an hour in New Hampshire. If it exists, I'll retract my statement. That's fine. The government, when it artificially raises wages, artificially increases costs on business, it artificially drives down the labor pool. And right now we are in the middle of an economic recession because of coronavirus and because of the government shutdowns imposed by Governor Chris Sununu. So what we need to do is prop up these businesses. We need to get government out of the way, and we need to get the economy back on track. And then that will expand the base for jobs, that will expand the base for wages, and more people will be able to get better jobs for better wages without government interference.
Thank you, Mr. Maidment. Mr. Leishman, minimum wage, would you vote to raise it? If so or not? Whoops, excuse me, Mr. Leishman, you've been muted. Wait a minute, we'll find you.
Yes.
Okay, there you are.
Go.
Sorry.
Yes, I would certainly, I voted to support the increase of the minimum wage. I think even $15 may not be enough. The least amount that I pay my employees is $22 an hour. And I think if I could do even more than that, I would. But we certainly need to look around us. And if you look at all the other New England states, they've all got a program moving forward to bring their minimum wages up to about $15 an hour in the next several years. So we should also do that.
Okay. Now I'm going to check with my boss here, Kate Kuhn, who organized this. And we were trying to end at 8:15. Am I correct, Kate? Mr. Leishman, you did not get your 2 minutes at the beginning to make a statement. And if there are issues that we didn't cover once you got here and joined us that you would like to address, we'll give you, let's say we'll give you 3 minutes to do that as your kind of opening, closing, and wrap-up statement. And then we'll get a brief 1 minute closing from the other two candidates. So you're up first, Mr. Leishman, for this.
All right, thanks, Liz. And again, thanks for everybody for participating in this Zoom. A little bit about me. I've been in New Hampshire about 55 years now, or maybe a little more. I enjoy serving in government. I'm now serving my 10th term in the legislature. I've been on the Judiciary Committee, the Election Law Committee, the Environment and Agriculture Committee, and have spent the last 10 years on the Finance Committee. And for those of you that don't know, the Finance Committee is that other committee in the legislature that deals with the state budget every 2 years. And the last budget we dealt with was about $13 billion. I've served as the chair of Division 1 several terms, which deals with the judicial branch, the Department of Environmental Services, the legislative branch, the Department of Justice, and dozens of other agencies. I do have the time to serve. As I think some of you know, I own a railroad and we're very busy during the so-called construction season, but during the winter we shut down, which allows me to be in Concord every day, which the Fiscal and Finance Committee pretty much require. As far as some major positions that you may have already covered, I am pro-choice. I also, we just discussed gun control. I'm very much in favor of tougher gun laws. I voted to repeal the death penalty. As some of you also know, the death penalty passed by 1 vote this time. So every vote does count up there. I'd also like to do a little shout out to my friend Ivy Vann, who also works very hard and is a great representative from Peterborough and does a great job for us. I try to be very accessible. I freely give out my access as far as cell phones, and I do respond to every email that I get from folks in the Peterborough area and try to respond to the hundreds that Ivy and I get every day, sometimes from outside of the district. But again, I enjoy it. I'm hoping to return for another term and try to do the best I can for the voters, not only of Peterborough, but the state of New Hampshire. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leishman. Ms. Vann, Mr. Maidment, you can address any other issues that you want to respond to. I see something in the chat that Ms. Vann wants to, and make your pitch as a closing statement. Ms. Vann, you're up next.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, this is not working out as well as it should have. I've got to find her and unmute her.
There we go. No, it is because when I think that my dogs are likely to go like bottle rockets, I mute myself. Yeah, I'm looking forward to being back in the legislature. One of the things that I want to address are some housing issues. I was just thinking about the thing I wrote in the chat that Ms. Tentarelli was referring to, was the whole question of the $11 an hour, that's what McDonald's is paying. So because I am never without a calculator, I ran the numbers. If you're getting $11 an hour, and we're not going to go into what you're paying in taxes, you have $600 a month to cover transportation and housing together, because you have to do those two things together. I defy you to find a place to live for $600 a month. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there are plenty of places that are not $11 an hour. I think the bowling alley is not offering that for their help. I don't think that some of the general stores are offering that much. We need to address the wage disparity. It's a huge problem in this country, and it is a disparity that has to do with race and gender and a great many other things. So yes, I'm hoping to go back to the State House and take on some of those issues.
Thank you, Ms. Vann. Mr. Maidment, your closing statement, please.
I think, I agree with Ivy Vann on some issues. I agree with Representative Leishman on some issues. I think that I am the perfect representative for Peterborough that can agree on the issues that matter and also make change where it matters. For example, we can legalize marijuana. We can achieve criminal justice reform. We can abolish the death penalty like we did last session. And we can also make achievements on other issues. We can keep taxes low. We can keep spending low, but we can keep spending where it matters. And we can talk about the things that really matter to most granted staters, which is keeping their hard-earned money in their wallet, okay? We can protect their Second Amendment rights, their Fourth Amendment rights, their Fifth Amendment rights. We can protect all of those rights at the same time with keeping taxes low, legalizing marijuana, letting people just live free or die.
I want to thank the candidates very much for coming. Mr. Pilcher did not respond to the invitation. So you do have two people that you can vote for on election day. And I also thank the voters who came today, some of whom submitted questions in advance. I want to thank Kate Kuhn and Marcia King and Carol Kraus and all the other people who put this together and were helping me run it. So at this point, in a live forum, I would say I'll lift my ban on applause so that we can thank the candidates and thank the presenters. So let's do that virtually if we can. And I thank you very much all for coming. Good night.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Liz.
everybody.
Okay.
A wonderful forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Stay well.
Night.
Bye. Thank you, Kate. Thanks, Marcia.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. And it's recorded, and we'll put a YouTube link together. And again, thank everybody for taking part in this. I'm glad that we did not get Zoom bombed.
No, we did this all right. Thank goodness.
This forum did what forums are supposed to do. Everybody got to, talk about the issues, and people get to hear, clear positions, I think. So I think it's very helpful.
So thank you, Kate. Thank you, candidates. Good luck to you all.
Again.
Bye.
Stay out of trouble, Liz.
Oh, no. No, that's not me.
Well-behaved women seldom make history.
Exactly. All right, I'm the host, so I'm going to click.
I've got no worries there. I should make some history.
That's right.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.